Okay, so we are back with Extreme Carnage, and as I promised you guys, we're covering Toxin, right? Toxin is gonna be in here. Now, here's the thing. Toxin is the most powerful of all the symbiotes, right? I mean, the guy's just ridiculously OP, and here's the reason why. So if you look at the design of Toxin, he looks a lot like a combination of Carnage and Venom, and the reason for that is Carnage is the offspring of Venom, and Toxin is the offspring of Carnage. The important thing here is that Toxin possesses powers belonging to both Carnage and Venom, but he's stronger than both. And the idea was that at the time, there was a desire by Carnage to actually kill Toxin because Toxin would basically grow up to become more powerful than essentially Carnage or Venom. The problem with this is that neither one was powerful enough to do it. And because of the fact that Eddie had basically taken Toxin and bonded him to a cop, which in turn would allow Toxin to essentially become a hero, it basically meant that he wasn't really going to be an evil symbiote similar to Carnage or anything like that. And so for a while, Toxin was awesome. Now, eventually he was killed off in Venom Volume 2, and ultimately he's just kind of just been around or just sort of been out there ever since. More recently, and during this story in particular, the Toxin symbiote had actually bonded itself to a kid named Bren, who was the son of one of the basically anti-symbiote task force guys that worked at Alchemax. Nobody's significant, but Toxin had just bonded itself to this kid. The kicker here is that Carnage tries to attain the Toxin symbiote by quite literally bringing it into the hive, but Toxin didn't have any of that. I told you guys, Toxin's on a whole different level, right? So when Carnage goes in to try to bring Toxin into the void, the mindscape, which he pretty much does, Toxin just overpowers him, right? Just like overpowers Carnage and then basically destroys Carnage in the mindscape, right? Now, Carnage in the physical form is still out there, right? But as far as his ability to access the mindscape, it's not there anymore, right? This fight happens pretty fast too. Like he literally tears the head off of Carnage and is like, that's it, right? Like, you know, Carnage is basically done for. And so that's kind of the crazy thing, right? That's the power that Toxin has, the ability to overpower Carnage in this mindscape and call it a day. Now, with itself having been bonded to Bren, in turn, Bren of course shows up on the scene, finds his father injured, and is like, okay, we got to go do something, right? Now at this point, you pick up with Hank and you pick up with Flash Thompson. Now again, these guys are working together just because of the fact that you've got a kind of history there. They both served in the military, they're both looking to do grander things, and if I'm being honest, I think with Hank, there's a little bit of, I could do more than what I'm doing right now. Not necessarily a kind of hero syndrome or anything like that, but in the sense that he's kind of like, I'm more capable than what I'm doing at the moment, right? He enjoys what he's doing, right? Working for charitable organizations and giving the kind of things they need, but being kind of left out of what you would call the superhero antics that exist out there kind of gives him the desire to sort of be something more. And that's why I wouldn't go as far as to say he jumped at the opportunity to work alongside Flash, but he kind of did. He really sort of did there. But because of the fact that Toxin is, by all standards of measurement, a hero, he ends up working alongside Flash Thompson and Silence to try to track down Carnage, as well as the other Life Foundation symbiotes, and take those guys out. Now, at this point, we switch over to a symbiote who, depending on who you talk to, can actually be more sadistic than Carnage himself, right? This is Gemma, and Gemma is the host of the Agony symbiote. Now, the idea behind Gemma being the host of this symbiote is, one, she works for the Peter Crane campaign, basically, and that's really where Hank's been tasked as well, right? Hank is kind of operating, behind the scenes as just what is in effect a normal person that nobody would really suspect of being a symbiote, operating inside the Peter Crane campaign as well, so we can of course feed information to Flash Thompson. But the big thing about this is that Gemma would use her powers as the Agony symbiote to basically destroy people who are predators, particularly those who look for and basically assault women or the defenseless. And so when a couple of guys track her down for the purpose of doing what we can probably imagine they're going to do, she basically uses the Agony symbiote and takes them out. Now, a big difference here is the Agony symbiote could spew acid, and so that's one of the things that happens here. These guys are destroyed quickly. But the more twisted element of Gemma comes into play when she gets back home, and what she actually does for these people that she kills is she uses them as trophies, right? Not all of them, just pieces of them. Like her lamp, the actual pole, I guess, whatever you want to call it, is made of a human spine. She's got an arm mounted above the TV, right? Speak no evil, hear no evil, see no evil. Those skulls are kind of sitting on her table. So this is kind of the twisted nature of her. Now, the idea of Agony is she's not really good, she's not really evil, she's really just kind of out for her own ends. And that's why when Carnage shows up and basically says, hey, like, we need need to work together, then initially she's kind of like, I don't really do well with a team, right? I mean, she is technically a Life Foundation symbiote, but she's like, I don't do the whole team thing. I do my own thing. But ultimately, a bargain is struck between her and Carnage. Now, we don't know the details of it. We simply just know all the other members of the Life Foundation symbiotes who have been captured have been brought here, right, to basically work alongside Carnage. Now, the other caveat to this is that the initial task and the initial idea put together by Flash Thompson, based on everything that was going on with Silence, in the sense that she shut down the connection of one of the symbiotes to the hive mind, is that she could presumably do the same thing to Carnage. More so than that, a way out is a way in. And so if Carnage can find them, she can find Carnage. And so the idea of Flash Thompson is go into the void and see if you can find a way to basically take out Carnage. The big kicker to this is that when she went into the void, it was totally empty. Carnage wasn't there. And while it was normally a place that was in effect a reality that Carnage could alter himself, right? It's basically in the mindscape of Carnage. That in turn, with nobody being there, that led into the idea that Toxin had destroyed Carnage in the mindscape, and Toxin was the only occupant there, which is how it was they kind of met up with Toxin in the first place. But the important thing here is that because of what she's able to do to kind of communicate and track down the other symbiotes, locate them, she does that, right? At the behest of Eddie, and really of her own desire, right? She's not really forced into it. It's also partly her own desire. She's able to manage and basically track down where the other symbiotes are, right? Where they're all kind of meeting together. And then Carnage basically like references her, right? So Carnage knows she's there and he knows they're coming. Now, what this does is it destroys the element of surprise, which is an important thing. And one of the reasons why is because Flash Thompson is not a highly imaginative guy, right? He's a cool guy, but at the end of the day, Flash Thompson was just your standard run-of-the-mill foot soldier. He did learn some really cool elements of like espionage and things like that when he was Agent Venom, but in terms of being able to craft a highly unique plan that nobody would ever see coming, that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. But the important thing here is that because of this bargain that was struck between Carnage and Agony, that ultimately she ends up siding with Carnage. Now, the important thing here is that from the perspective of Flash Thompson, the target is the President of the United States. Now, the biggest reason why Flash Thompson is going with this is because he's operating under the belief that the Carnage symbiote is bonded to Peter Crane. And whatever motivation the Carnage symbiote happens to have, taking out the President of the United States would seemingly work. Now, the funny thing about this is this really falls very closely to the events of like Days of Future Past, right? The funny thing about this is that while it's not really referenced here, the superhero community knows about it, right? It's a well-known set of events. You had Mystique and her Brotherhood of Evil Mutants who tried to take out Charles Xavier, Senator Robert Kelly, and Moira McTaggart. In the Days of Future Past timeline, they succeeded. In the main Marvel Universe, they were defeated because of the actions of Rachel Summers and Kitty Pryde from the Days of Future Past universe. But the fact that that was stopped does not stop anybody from being aware of the fact that it happened. You have to imagine word spreads, right? I wouldn't go as far as to say the Flash Thompson is like, this is happening, and I know they're going to try to take out the president because it's what Mystique did during Days of Future Past. That's not necessarily the case, but it has to on some level feed into his line of logic here, right? The other part of that is it just makes good sense that if Peter Crane is launching a campaign designed to discredit the President of the United States and the president's political party by basically saying all they're doing here in honor of everybody who died to kind of make amends for all this and to do something about this is to build a statue, some meaningless gesture that has no real impact whatsoever, then what we need to do is actually do something, right? And so if his campaign's running in direct opposition to everything the president's doing, what better way to secure his presidency and to really boost his own profile than to essentially be Carnage, and then as Carnage, kill the President of the United States, which in turn presents the credibility that alien symbiotes are a real threat to the Earth. And then suddenly you've got Peter Crane in the best position as the leader of the anti-alien movement. His profile is skyrocketed, right? And this guy becomes probably the most famous politician in the entirety of the United States, right? So it makes sense. This is what they would do, right? It makes perfect sense here. The big kicker and the caveat to this is that as they're kind of analyzing all this and that as they're looking around, that Silence comes to the realization there's no symbiotes here, right? There's no one here. No one from the Life Foundation is here. I can't sense any of them. And that's when it kicks into Flash Thompson. Oh my God, the president was never the target. It was never the president that they were going after. Like Crane is the target, right? Peter Crane is the actual target. As soon as that information is revealed to Hank, you basically end up realizing that Gemma, of course, as we know, is Agony, and then all the other members of the Life Foundation symbiotes are basically there, and they kill Hank, right? They take Hank out just like that, only for us to find out Arthur Crane, the son of Peter Crane, is the actual host for Carnage. He's the one son that is possessed by the Carnage symbiote, which is a crazy set of events. And so following that, you actually get this insane revelation, right? You have it told to Flash Thompson that, of course, Hank is basically dead. The problem is that as he's told this dude is taken out, and Hank just comes back. And the reason why is because Hank is possessed by the Sleeper symbiote, right? And this is the craziest thing here. Hank doesn't even know he's possessed by this guy, right? And Sleeper symbiote, this guy is cool, right? This guy's one of the coolest concepts out there in Marvel Comics. Now, Sleeper is technically a offspring of Venom. The big difference here is that unlike the other offspring, Carnage and so on, it didn't really bond itself to a host right off the bat. Instead, it was left in the care of Alchemax, but they couldn't bond it to anybody, and they could study it, but they couldn't use it for nefarious purposes. Now, of course, Alchemax tried to, but in more recent years, you guys are probably familiar with the Sleeper symbiote because it was really accompanied for a while to Dylan Brock. Now, initially it was bonded to him, but once Dylan's powers of repelling symbiotes and controlling symbiotes manifested, it couldn't bond itself to him anymore. And that's why during the events of Absolute Carnage and King in Black, it was basically a dog that would follow him around. Now, technically, and even in this moment right now, it still lives with Eddie Brock and like Dylan and them, right? It's just here at the moment, it's been recalled by Flash Thompson. And the reason why is because Hank, being a member of the team, doesn't really have a symbiote. And so if things popped off, it would basically be Flash sending Hank into a death trap. And so in order to ensure that didn't happen, he contacted Sleeper and had it secretly bond itself to Hank so that if something like this happened, it would basically heal Hank, he'd be able to recover and then alter his mind so Hank would never have any idea that he was bonded to a symbiote in the first place. So in effect, he's asleep this entire time. It's just Sleeper talking to Eddie Brock. It's really cool and it's very, very ingenious. But with them coming to the realization that the actual target itself is Peter Crane, the other members of the Life Foundation have basically bailed off after the perceived death of Hank and taken off to the meeting where Peter Crane is located. And so as he's out here making this great big huge speech, because the father-son dynamic proved to be so popular among the general public and the followers, right? Because it provided a kind of wholesomeness, right? I mean, for those of the guys that are not here in the States, one of the big things that goes on in the realm of politics is we like to believe in the idea of like the wholesome nuclear family, that for whatever reason, we still seem to kind of worship these archaic ideologies in terms of like how society functions. And in a lot of ways, we want our politicians to kind of follow that, right? So the nuclear family, the husband, the wife, the two kids, right? That kind of a thing. I mean, it's silly and nonsensical, but so are American politics. But the important thing here is that the father-son dynamic resonated, right? And so because of that, the idea of bringing Arthur out is something that Peter does, right? He's like, Arthur, come on out here, buddy, come out here, let's, make your speech and do the whole thing, because we're a father and son. We get along. When we were younger, we threw the football together and all that kind of stuff, right? The idealized life that so many of the average people imagine is what we imbue, what we body, right? We're the perfect family, so to speak. And ultimately, Crane kills his dad. Literally, because he's possessed by the Carnage symbiote, he impales his father and then tears him apart. And then basically, while everybody's watching this in horror, that you basically have Carnage who's just like, yes, right? Like this whole chaos here, this whole chaotic situation, the whole thing that Peter Crane warned you about, this whole situation that like the future's coming and there's a alien threat that's going to kill everybody. That future is now. Now here's a very, very important distinction that we have to explain here. No one knows this is Arthur outside of the members of the Life Foundation symbiotes and like Flash Thompson and those guys. Nobody else knows it's Arthur. So when you see, like when the general public sees Carnage out here, they don't make the connection. Oh my God, that's Arthur Crane, the son of Peter, who's actually an alien and killed his dad. That's crazy. No one makes that connection, right? And honestly, given the nature of the American people, even if we could, we probably wouldn't because it's not what we would want to believe. The important thing here is that the symbiotes literally just go on like it's a bloodbath, right? I mean, it's just no quarters given. They kill as many people as they possibly can. And that's the point. That was the whole point here, was to bring Peter Crane and this huge Friends of Humanity movement together, to organize it, to structure it, to have him put on this great big huge display for the world to see, and then turn it into a veritable bloodbath. Right now, in the middle of all this, of course, Sleeper shows up, Flash Thompson shows up, Silence shows up, right? These other members show up, and what you basically have here is a Symbiote Civil War, right? That's basically what this is. Carnage and the Life Foundation symbiotes, or at least those he could gather, facing off against Flash Thompson and his symbiotes, right? So it really is as a civil war in a lot of ways, and it's cool, right? The Symbiote Civil War. It's really cool. But of course, for the most part, it's a somewhat even battle to a degree. And a lot of this is really just the result of different symbiotes having different powers in comparison to other symbiotes, the kind of experiences they have using their abilities and so on and so forth. The funny thing about this is that Carnage makes this remark in basically saying Arthur Crane and Cletus Cassidy were in effect cut from the same cloth. Sure, they're not the exact same person, but their upbringings are very, very similar, right? That Arthur started with small animals, and then he moved on to homeless people, and then he actually took out a couple of girlfriends and some different classmates over the years. This guy has a very, very bad history. And not only that, at the time that Carnage encountered him, he was already in the process of trying to find a way to take out his dad and replace him as senator, right? And so in effect, that's why Carnage bonded to Arthur. Now again, it does get a little more significant than that, and then again, we'll talk about that once we get closer to the end. But in the middle of all this, here comes Iron Man with his symbiote/Extremis suit. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, Extremis is something that's been around in Marvel Comics for quite some time, and it was really more of like an organic Iron Man suit, right? That in years past, before Extremis, Iron Man suits were basically physical armors, right? He would step into them, like what you saw with the first Iron Man movie. The difference between that and Extremis is Extremis was more organic, right? Almost every future version of armor that he developed was based on Extremis tech. So it was very symbiotic in nature, and in truth, there wasn't really any big difference between the symbiotes themselves and the Extremis tech. The only difference is that Extremis was basically nanomachines, and the symbiotes are living organisms. But Iron Man was able to take a symbiote and bond it to the Extremis tech, and then in turn create an Extremis symbiote armor, right? Extrembiote armor is what he basically calls it, and then in turn go forward from there. So he's basically fighting symbiotes with what is in effect symbiote tech combined with his own tech. The big problem here is that when he's able to blow the Carnage symbiote off of Arthur, he's like, it's done, it's over. And then the Carnage symbiote in turn takes over his suit and then basically bonds itself to his Extremis symbiote armor and then basically steals it for its own ends. And so Iron Man's literally thrown out of his own suit, is taken over by Carnage, and then Carnage bonding to this now has a combination of Iron Man's Extremis tech and his own symbiote. This makes him highly dangerous because instead of him just being an organism that can just bond to people and just do crazy things, now it's one part technology. That means the ability to hack into computer systems and all kinds of stuff, right? Like if Skynet had a physical form, it would be Carnage. That's basically what he is right now. And then he just leaves, right? He just like takes off and leaves everybody else there to basically be captured by Alchemax and so on and so forth. Now, of course, the other members of the Life Foundation are like, what? I mean, Agony basically ends up taking off with Carnage, and that seems to be the bargain that was struck, that no matter how things played out, Carnage would basically take Agony with him. But ultimately, you know, Agony ends up leaving with Carnage. They basically bail out. All the other members of the Life Foundation symbiotes are rounded up and captured, and that's basically it. Now, the reason why this matters and the reason why all this happened with Arthur Crane in the first place is because once it all pops off and it's all over, Arthur Crane is like we're like, you don't believe anything that symbiote told you, did you? Like, it wasn't me. The symbiote was lying, right? Like, you gotta help me. Like, I don't, what's going on here, right? Like, he kind of comes off with this idea of like, I don't know what was going on. And the big thing about this is you don't know if he's lying or not. You don't know if he's telling the truth or not. Now, he is ultimately lying in the sense that what ends up happening is because of the fact that his father was killed and his father was a senator, of course, whenever a senator basically ends up leaving office, whether it's because they pass away while in office, God forbid they're taken out while in office, or if they simply have to resign for any number of reasons, it's up to the governor to basically appoint a replacement. And the governor appointed Arthur to replace his father as senator. Not only that, because Arthur was viewed as quote unquote a victim of the entire symbiote attack during his father's rally, that now he's the face of the anti-alien movement. Basically, his political profile has been increased by a huge margin. His father died a martyr, and now the whole message and the whole philosophy and everything is now left to Arthur, right? He's a huge deal in the realm of politics. But the way that we know he's lying is he's ultimately met by the arrival of Agony, and he asks her, is there any way to get him back, right? Bring Carnage back to me. You know, I can be useful. I'll do anything he wants. And she asks the question, are you still useful? Are you useful to us? And he's like, yes, I can be, right? I can be useful to you guys. In reality, this is ultimately what Carnage was looking for. Now, this is one of the things that's kind of weird here. Carnage was never a political character, right? In the sense that he got involved in people with, in politics. Carnage was never really on that level. In fact, the events of Absolute Carnage had made Carnage more intelligent and more capable than he'd ever been before, and made his aspirations far more grand than they had ever been before. The entire basis behind Carnage was rooted in just causing as much death and destruction as he possibly could. And that was it. That was all it was. But that's one of the cool things about this, right? The idea of Carnage just killing all kinds of people, that was rooted in the nature of Cletus Cassidy bonded to the Carnage symbiote. But it looks like, much like what we've seen with the Venom symbiote and the Toxin symbiote and all the other symbiotes, Carnage has learned. Carnage has grown. Carnage has moved beyond this simple process of just like, I want to destroy stuff, and now his aspirations are going big time. The question is, how is it going to play out? And honestly, we don't know. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.